I stared at the crumpled letter in my hand, my world crashing down around me. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, but the message was clear. My husband, Evan, had betrayed me. I never thought you would stoop this low, Evan. You've betrayed our family. My voice trembled as I confronted him, standing in our kitchen with our newborn son sleeping peacefully in the next room. Evan's face paled. Carrie, I can explain. It was a mistake, I swear. A mistake? I spat the words out. Having an affair isn't a mistake, Evan. It's a choice. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, Carrie. I love you. I love our son. It won't happen again. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the letter from Laura, whoever she was, painted a different picture. One of stolen moments and broken vows. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Evan's silence was deafening. How long, Evan? I demanded, louder this time. He flinched. 6 months. But it's over now, I promise. 6 months. Half a year of lies. I felt sick to my stomach. What about our son? What about the family we're supposed to be building? Evan's eyes filled with tears. I'll do anything to make this right, Carrie. Please give me another chance. I closed my eyes, trying to think. The sound of our son's soft coos drifted from the nursery, reminding me of the innocent life caught in the middle of this mess. I need time, I said finally, opening my eyes to meet Evan's desperate gaze. I can't just forgive and forget. Of course, he nodded eagerly. Whatever you need. I'll sleep in the guest room. As Evan left the kitchen, I sank into a chair, the letter still clutched in my hand. How had we gotten here? And more importantly, where do we go from here? The shrill ring of the doorbell startled me from my thoughts. I wiped my eyes and stood, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. I opened the door to find Judy, Evan's mother, standing there with a too bright smile. Surprise, dear. I thought I'd drop by to help with the baby. My heart sank. This was the last thing I needed right now. Judy's daily visits became a living nightmare. Every morning, she'd breeze in, criticizing everything from how I folded the laundry to the way I held my own son. Oh, darling, she'd coo, snatching the baby from my arms. Let me show you how it's done. You don't want to suffocate the poor dear. I gritted my teeth, reminding myself that she was Evan's mother and my son's grandmother. But my patience was wearing thin. One afternoon, as I was preparing lunch, Judy cornered me in the kitchen. You know, Carrie, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I always thought Laura was such a better match for Evan. She had such poise, such grace. I froze, the knife I was using to chop vegetables suddenly feeling very heavy in my hand. Laura? I asked, my voice tight. Judy's eyes widened in mock innocence. Oh, didn't Evan tell you about her? They dated before you, of course. Such a lovely girl. My mind raced. Laura. The same name as the woman in the letter. Couldn't be a coincidence. I think it's time for you to leave, Judy, I said, setting down the knife before I was tempted to use it. She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Don't be silly, dear. I'm here to help. That evening, I confronted Evan. Your mother needs to stop coming over every day, I said, pacing our bedroom. Evan sighed, loosening his tie. She's just trying to help, Carrie. Can't you be a little more grateful? Grateful? I exploded. She criticizes everything I do. And she keeps bringing up your ex-girlfriend, Laura. The same Laura you had an affair with? Evan's face paled. She doesn't know about that. She must be talking about someone else. Don't lie to me, Evan. Not again. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, my mother means well. She's just old-fashioned. And Laura, that's in the past. You need to let it go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Let it go? Your mother is trying to push me out and you're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, Evan protested weakly. But he was. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to Evan's steady breathing beside me, I realized that the rift between us was growing wider by the day. Something had to give, and soon. The next morning, as Judy waltzed in with her usual smug smile, I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. It was time to set some boundaries, no matter the cost. I couldn't take it anymore. With my son nestled in my arms, I drove to my parents' house, desperate for a reprieve from Judy's constant criticism and Evan's disappointing silence. Mom opened the door, her smile fading as she saw my tear-stained face. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "What's wrong?" Dad appeared behind her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Come in, Kerry. Tell us everything." As we sat in their cozy living room, the story poured out of me: Evan's affair, Judy's interference, the constant mentions of Laura. My parents listened, their faces a mix of shock and anger. "That woman has no right to treat you this way," Mom said, her voice tight with fury. "And Evan, I can't believe he's letting this happen." Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You need to stand up to Judy, Carrie. Set clear boundaries. And if Evan won't support you, well," he trailed off, but his meaning was clear. I nodded, feeling a spark of determination ignite within me. "You're right. I can't let this continue." Just then, the doorbell rang. Mom went to answer it, returning with a surprise visitor, Henry, Evan's father. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," he said, his kind eyes meeting mine. "I sensed something was wrong, and I wanted to check on you and the little one." As Henry settled in, he shared his own experiences with Judy. "She's always been difficult," he admitted. "But what she's doing to you, Carrie, it's not right. And I'm ashamed that Evan isn't standing up to her." His words were a balm to my battered spirit. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly supported. "I've been thinking," Henry continued, his voice low. "I might have a way to help you deal with Judy. But it's not going to be easy." I leaned forward, hope blooming in my chest. "I'm listening." As Henry outlined his plan, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. It was risky, but it might be my only chance to reclaim my life and protect my son from Judy's toxic influence. "Are you sure about this, Carrie?" Mom asked, worry etched on her face. I looked down at my sleeping son, then back at the supportive faces around me. "I have to try," I said firmly. "For him and for myself." As I left my parents' house that evening, Henry's plan buzzing in my mind, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Judy had no idea what was coming her way. And as for Evan, well, he'd have to choose a side once and for all. The next morning, as I prepared to put our plan into action, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Mom's bringing Laura over to help with the baby today. Don't make a scene." My hand shook with anger as I read the message. This was it, the final straw. With Henry's plan in my back pocket and my parents' support behind me, I was ready to face whatever Judy and Laura had in store. Game on, I thought as I strapped my son into his car seat. It's time to take back control. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Judy's sudden insistence on bringing Laura to our home set off alarm bells in my head. With Henry's plan in mind, I decided to do some digging of my own. That afternoon, I followed Judy to her favorite cafe, my heart pounding as I slipped into a booth nearby, hidden behind a large potted plant. I didn't have to wait long before Laura arrived, sliding into the seat across from Judy.
Their hushed voices carried just enough for me to catch snippets of their conversation. "Convince Evan to leave her," Judy was saying, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the table. Laura nodded eagerly. "I've been texting him. He's starting to come around." My blood ran cold. They were actively plotting to break up my marriage. "That foolish girl won't know what hit her," Judy cackled. "Once we get rid of Carrie, you and Evan can pick up where you left off." I'd heard enough. Trembling with rage and hurt, I stormed out of the cafe, nearly bumping into a waiter in my haste. Back home, I confronted Judy as soon as she walked through the door. "I know what you're up to," I spat, my voice shaking. "I heard you and Laura at the cafe." Judy's face went pale for a moment before she recovered, plastering on a look of innocence. I don't know what you're talking about, dear. You must be mistaken. Don't lie to me. I shouted, my composure cracking. You're trying to push me out and reunite Evan with Laura. How could you do this to your own family? Judy's mask slipped, revealing a sneer. Family? You're nothing but an interloper. Laura is the one Evan should be with. You're just not good enough for my son. Before I could respond, Evan walked in looking confused. What's going on here? I turned to him desperate. Evan, your mother and Laura are conspiring to break us up. I heard them at the cafe. They've been manipulating you, trying to push me out. Evan's face clouded with disbelief. Carrie, that's ridiculous. You're being paranoid. Paranoid? I echoed, stunned. How can you not see what's happening? Judy seized the moment, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. Oh, Evan, I don't know what's gotten into Carrie. She's making up such horrible lies about me. I watched in horror as Evan put his arm around his mother, comforting her. Mom, it's okay. Carrie's just been under a lot of stress lately. In that moment, I realized I was alone in this fight. Evan had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. With a heavy heart, I made a decision that would change everything. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly, looking Evan in the eye. I'm leaving, and I'm taking our son with me. As I turned to pack our things, I knew there was no going back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight for my family, with or without Evan by my side. I never thought it would come to this. As I stood in my living room, my son cradled protectively in my arms, I faced off against the three people who had turned my life upside down: Judy, Laura, and Evan. Judy had the audacity to bring Laura into our home, claiming she was there to help out. The moment I saw them walk through the door together, something inside me snapped. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Both of you, get out of my house right now. Judy feigned innocence. Carrie, dear, we're only trying to help. You seem so overwhelmed lately. Overwhelmed. I laughed bitterly. I'm overwhelmed by your constant interference and manipulation. I know what you two are up to, and it ends now. Laura stepped forward, her face a mask of concern. Carrie, I think you're overreacting. We're all here for the baby's sake. Don't you dare mention my son, I hissed. You lost that right when you decided to help break up my family. Evan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Carrie, that's enough. You're being hysterical. His words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to him, tears stinging my eyes. Hysterical? Your mother and your ex-girlfriend are plotting to push me out of our marriage, and you think I'm being hysterical. It's not like that, Evan protested weakly. Then what is it like, Evan? I demanded. Explain to me why your mother is constantly undermining me, why she keeps bringing up Laura, why you've been so distant lately. The room fell silent. I could see the guilt in Evan's eyes, the smug satisfaction on Judy's face, and the poorly concealed hope in Laura's expression. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice breaking. I won't live like this, constantly fighting for my place in my own family. I turned to Evan, my heart shattering with every word. You need to make a choice right now, Evan. It's either me and our son or them. But I won't stay here another minute with these two in our home. Evan looked torn, his gaze shifting between me and his mother. In that moment, I saw our entire future hanging in the balance. Evan, please, Judy interjected, her voice sickly sweet. You know, we only want what's best for you and the baby. Something in Evan's expression hardened, and I knew I had lost him. He took a step towards his mother and Laura, and my world crumbled around me. Without another word, I turned and walked to our bedroom. With shaking hands, I packed a bag for myself and our son. As I zipped it closed, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I walked back into the living room, my head held high despite the tears streaming down my face. I'm leaving, I announced. And I'm taking our son with me. When you're ready to be a husband and father instead of a puppet, you know where to find us. With those final words, I walked out the door, leaving behind the shattered remains of the life I thought we'd built together. As I strapped my son into his car seat, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of my fight for the future we deserved. The guest room at my parents' house felt like a sanctuary after the chaos I'd left behind. For days, I focused solely on my son, finding solace in his innocent smiles and coos. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. A week after I'd left Evan, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced, thinking it might be him, but instead, I found Henry standing there, his kind eyes filled with concern. "Carrie," he said softly, "we need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, my son napping peacefully nearby. Henry pulled out a small recorder and placed it between us. "I've been gathering evidence," he explained, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have done this years ago, but I was too much of a coward. Now, I can't stand by and watch Judy destroy another family." With trembling fingers, he pressed play. Judy's voice filled the room, dripping with malice as she plotted with Laura to break up my marriage. There were multiple recordings, phone calls, conversations at cafes, even one from inside our home. My stomach churned as I listened to them discuss how to manipulate Evan, how to push me out of the picture. "There's more," Henry said, pulling out a stack of papers. Bank statements showing money transfers from Judy to Laura. Emails detailing their plans. "It's all here, Carrie." I stared at the evidence before me, a mix of vindication and heartbreak washing over me. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would she do this?" Henry sighed deeply. "Judy has always been controlling, but it's gotten worse over the years. She sees you as a threat to her relationship with Evan. And Laura, well, she's always been Judy's perfect puppet." As the weight of the situation sank in, I felt a surge of determination. "What do we do now?" Henry's eyes met mine, a glimmer of hope shining through. "We fight back. We show Evan the truth and put an end to Judy's manipulation once and for all." I nodded, my resolve strengthening. "I'm ready." Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "We need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow?" I showed Henry the message, and he squeezed my hand reassuringly. "This is your chance, Carrie. Show him everything. Make him see the truth." As I prepared for the confrontation that would determine the future of my family, I felt a mix of fear and determination. The evidence was irrefutable, but would it be enough to break through years of Judy's manipulation?
Tomorrow I would face Evan with the truth. And no matter the outcome, I knew I had to be strong for myself and for my son. My heart pounded as I walked into Evan's office, the folder of evidence clutched tightly to my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Evan looked up, his face a mix of relief and apprehension. "Carrie, I'm glad you came. We need to talk about—" I cut him off, dropping the folder on his desk. "No, Evan. You need to listen." For the next hour, I laid out everything, the recordings, the bank statements, the emails. Evan's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally devastating realization. "I can't believe this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My own mother." "Believe it," I said firmly. "Your mother and Laura have been manipulating you, manipulating us from the start." Evan stood abruptly. "We need to confront her. Now." We drove to Judy's house in tense silence. As we pulled up, I saw Laura's car in the driveway. Perfect. Judy opened the door, her fake smile faltering as she saw us both. "Evan, darling." And Carrie. What a surprise. We pushed past her into the living room where Laura sat, looking startled. "Mom," Evan said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." What followed was the most intense hour of my life. Evan confronted Judy and Laura with the evidence, his voice rising with each revelation. Judy's facade crumbled, her denials growing weaker as Evan's anger mounted. "How could you do this?" Evan shouted. "To your own son? To your grandson?" Judy's composure finally broke. "I was trying to protect you," she wailed. "That woman isn't good enough for you. Laura understands you, she—" "Stop it," Evan roared. "You've manipulated me my entire life. Well, it ends now." Laura, sensing defeat, tried to slink away, but I blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere," I hissed. "You're just as guilty in this." As Judy sobbed and Laura cowered, Evan turned to me, his eyes filled with remorse. "Carrie, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have stood by you. I wanted to forgive him, to fall into his arms and forget everything. But the pain was still too raw. I need time, Evan, I said softly. We both do. Evan nodded, understanding in his eyes. He turned back to Judy and Laura. I want both of you out of our lives. For good. As we left Judy's house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Truth was out, the manipulation exposed. But as I looked at Evan, I realized our journey was far from over. What now? I asked, cradling our sleeping son in the back seat. Evan sighed heavily. Now we heal. Together or apart, that's up to you. But I promise you, Carrie, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right for you and for our son. As we drove away, leaving the wreckage of Judy's machinations behind, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I could see a future, one where truth and love might finally prevail. 6 months after the confrontation with Judy, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the gentle cooing of my son. The journey here hadn't been easy, but as I looked around, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. Evan and I had decided to separate officially. It was a painful decision, but we both knew it was necessary for healing. To my surprise, Evan had been supportive throughout the process, finally stepping up as a co-parent and working to rebuild our trust. As for Judy, she'd moved away shortly after the confrontation, ostracized by both Evan and Henry. I heard through Henry that she was living with a cousin in Florida, but I didn't care to know more. Her absence was a relief, like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocation. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Evan, right on time for his weekend with our son. Hey, he said softly, a tentative smile on his face. How are you settling in? I invited him in, watching as he scooped up our giggling son. The sight still tugged at my heart, but the pain was duller now, overshadowed by a growing sense of peace. It's going well, I replied. I start my new job next week. The mom and dad have been a huge help with childcare. Evan nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and hope. Carrie, I know I've said this before, but I'm truly sorry for everything. I'm grateful we can at least be civil for our son's sake. I smiled, surprising myself with how genuine it felt. We're doing our best, Evan. That's all we can do. As Evan left with our son, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I'd lost the life I thought I'd have, but in its place, I gained something invaluable: self-respect, strength, and a fierce determination to create a beautiful life for my child and myself. Later that evening, as I FaceTimed with my parents and Henry, who had become like a second father to me, I realized that family wasn't always what you were born into. Sometimes it was what you built from the ashes of betrayal and pain. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had discovered that fateful letter all those months ago. She was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for herself. I thought about the journey ahead, the challenges of single motherhood, rebuilding my career, and maybe someday opening my heart to love again. But for now, I was content. I had weathered the storm, and I had emerged not just intact, but triumphant. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever the future held, I knew I could face it. Through all, I had faced down Judy Monroe and won. There wasn't much that could scare me now. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it would bring.